So when I first started, simple things like an investor requesting for cash flows, I had to go get permission from the managing partner on whether or not you could even disclose that. Think about that. You know, somebody wants to see the backup to your IRR calculations, and it's selective about who you disclose that to. I mean, these days that's unheard of. But that was the mindset back then. It was a very secretive business. GPs had much more control over selecting which LPs they wanted to work with. Obviously, the market's become much more competitive, but LPs have also become much more sophisticated in wanting to understand the nuances behind those valuations or behind those IRR calculations or behind the investment thesis and how value creation occurs inside of the investments that you. So a lot of it has been through this sophistication that we've needed tools, Cobalt being one of them, iLevel is another one, database systems for benchmarking, all of these things have become an important part of our job in making sure that the investors are getting what they need.
Hussein, same question, and add a piece on what do you think is driving that need for transparency today as well?
Well, you know, to take a step back, when I think the three of us started in this business, not only were there no analytical tools for data, there wasn't really a lot of data out there. So many of the GPs had limited track records that they were presenting to prospective LPs. And at the same time, you know, by definition, the data set that would create a benchmark was pretty sparse. So you could get away, I think, with a lot more back then. Private equity always has a story to it. There's a narrative that needs to be told. And I think that was overweighted in the early days. We also, you know, were facing the challenges where people were not, LPs were not always open about how they were analyzing and benchmarking the data that was being presented, and the GPs as well were being very selective at some point. There was probably a change about a decade ago where I think general partners and then by extension placement agents realized that you had to sort of open up the kimono at a much earlier stage than was the case in the, you know, 25, 30 years ago.
Andrea?
Yeah, well, now that Hus has aged us, I have seen it over the last a little over 25 years, and you know, it is exactly as my colleagues here have said, which is that you know, the data really didn't exist for a long period of time, primarily because of the fact that there was a small select number of investors that were essentially keeping that data to themselves, and you know, they had the ability to do that because there wasn't a great deal of competition, which I do think is one of the key factors that has really materially changed. I would say the second is the market, right? You know, when there are dislocations in the market, we have seen, you know, the reaction of investors. The money pulls back out of the system, and in order to go back in, there has to be a huge number of questions to get a lot of people, you know, particularly my clients and their boards and their trustees, comfortable with the idea that we're going to start deploying additional capital. And the lack of information, both through, you know, kind of the internet bubble and the great financial crisis, has been real key drivers of, thankfully, in my opinion, getting that information. I mean, I can tell you, you've heard some interesting horror stories. I mean, I have great horror stories of getting cash flows, rerunning the IRRs, and finding that the net IRR that's being marketed is actually not the right IRR. And in one particular case, the IRR was actually understated, which is a pretty material thing for those that are marketing their funds. So, you know, it's important. It is a check in the system, and it's something that, you know, LPs view as a critical piece of information. And I think today, with the amount of competition, the number of managers out there across the system, thankfully, I don't think that is going to reverse itself anytime soon.